History doesn't punish arrogance immediately. It lets it grow. Nazi Germany believed the war was already won. Poland had fallen. France collapsed in weeks. Europe bent under the Iron Boot, and Berlin dismissed resistance as a nuisance, spies, saboteurs, partisans destined to vanish. They were wrong, because beneath occupied streets, something far more dangerous was forming. Not armies or parades, but patience, intelligence, from frozen Soviet strongholds to radios hidden in French barns, from refugee interrogators to a lone woman riding a bicycle through enemy territory. Germany's enemies were watching, learning, waiting. This is not the story of one battle. It's the story of ruthless payback moments when confidence turned into blindness, when hunters become the hunted and fear stopped working. Some of that payback came in fire and steel. Some came in whispers and codes, and one came quietly on a bicycle. Germany expected obedience. It got defiance. Chapter 1. The White Mouse and the War. Germany couldn't catch to the Gestapo. She was not a soldier. She was not an officer. She was not even supposed to matter. Yet she became one of the most hunted individuals in occupied Europe. Nancy Wake moved through Nazi checkpoints with laughter, charm, and nerves of steel, carrying messages that could collapse entire networks if discovered. Every raid seemed to miss her by minutes. Every trap closed just after she vanished. The Germans called her the White Mouse, a nickname born of frustration. No matter how tightly they sealed the maze, she slipped through the cracks. What they failed to understand was that Nancy Wake was not merely evading capture. She was learning, mapping patrol patterns, studying human weakness, understanding how fear made soldiers predictable. Then came the moment that turned legend into fact. When lost radio codes cut her off from Allied command, Nancy did what Germany never anticipated. She mounted a bicycle and rode more than 500 kilometers through occupied territory, crossing checkpoints, dodging patrols, surviving on grit alone to restore communication. It was not just bravery, it was defiance in motion. Germany hunted a mouse. Instead, it unleashed a predator. Chapter 2. Brest Fortress. When the East refused to break. Germany's war doctrine depended on momentum. Speed shattered morale. Shock collapsed resistance. Nowhere was this belief stronger than on the Eastern Front, where Nazi planners assumed Soviet forces would crumble under pressure. Brest Fortress was supposed to fall within hours. Instead, it became one of the first cracks in Germany's myth. Surrounded, outnumbered, cut off from command, Soviet defenders held on in underground tunnels and shattered walls. Ammunition ran out. Water ran out. Food disappeared. Still they fought. German troops found themselves facing resistance that did not retreat, did not surrender, and did not respond to fear the way Western Europe had. That refusal to acknowledge reality would haunt them. Because Brest Fortress proved that this war would not be decided by speed alone. It would be decided by endurance, and Germany had underestimated how much punishment its enemies were willing to absorb before striking back. Chapter 3. Kursk. When revenge turned into a trap. After the catastrophe at Stalingrad, Hitler wanted payback of his own. Operation Citadel was conceived as redemption, a massive armored strike meant to annihilate Soviet forces and restore German dominance. The plan relied on surprise, overwhelming firepower, and the belief that the enemy could not possibly prepare in time. But Germany no longer held all the cards. Allied intelligence had penetrated German communications. Soviet planners knew the attack was coming where, when, and how. Instead of retreating, they built defenses layered so deeply they bordered on absurdity. Mines by the hundreds of thousands, trenches within trenches, anti-tank guns positioned to overlap fields of fire. Kursk was not just a defeat. It was a reversal of psychological momentum. Germany had launched the attack expecting revenge. Instead, it walked into a carefully engineered counterstrike that bled its armored forces dry. From that moment forward, the Wehrmacht would never regain the strategic initiative in the East. The payback here was surgical, patient, calculated. Germany attacked expecting fear. It encountered preparation, and preparation proved deadlier than any counter-offensive. Chapter 4. The Dnieper. When scale broke the fantasy, German war planning was built on assumptions. One of the most dangerous was the belief that the Soviet Union had limits of coordination, limits of manpower, limits of endurance. The Dnieper River was meant to expose those limits. Hitler's commanders envisioned it as a natural wall, fortified into a defensive line that would stop the Red Army cold. Intelligence reports dismissed the idea that Soviet forces could organize a crossing along such an enormous front. The river, they believed, would do the work for them. They were catastrophically wrong. When the offensive began, it did not come as a single thrust, but as a tidal surge. Entire armies advanced at once, stretching hundreds of kilometers. Soviet troops crossed the river under relentless fire, using anything that would float: planks ripped from houses, crude rafts, even doors torn from villages already destroyed. Casualties were horrific, but momentum never slowed. Every crossing created another foothold. Every foothold became another flood. The German defense did not collapse because it lacked firepower. It collapsed because it was smothered. Commanders could not decide where to reinforce because the attack was everywhere. Supply lines snapped under pressure. Reserves evaporated as fast as they were deployed. Units found themselves isolated, surrounded, and annihilated without ever seeing the full enemy force. Chapter 5. The Ritchie Boys. Intelligence as a weapon. Not all vengeance came with gunfire. Some of the most devastating blows to Nazi Germany arrived quietly, across interrogation tables and inside intelligence reports. Thousands of refugees, many of them German-born Jews who had escaped persecution, returned to Europe wearing American uniforms. They were trained at Camp Ritchie, not to fight with rifles, but with understanding. They knew how Germans spoke, how they thought, how fear and authority shaped behavior. That knowledge became lethal. When captured, German soldiers were interrogated. The Ritchie boys did not rely on threats. They relied on familiarity. They knew the slang of specific regions, the structure of Wehrmacht units, the psychology of officers raised on obedience and hierarchy. Prisoners talked because they believed they were understood, and because they underestimated the men questioning them. Through careful listening, the Ritchie boys dismantled entire formations. They uncovered false orders, exposed weaknesses in command, and revealed troop movements before they happened. German units unraveled, not from attack, but from confusion. Misinformation spread. Trust eroded. Commanders acted on bad intelligence, walking directly into disaster. The irony was devastating. The regime that had stripped these men of citizenship, hunted their families, and erased their futures now faced them as architects of its defeat. Nazi ideology preached loyalty through fear. The Ritchie boys proved that loyalty without understanding was hollow. By war's end, their work had saved countless Allied lives and accelerated Germany's collapse. It was a form of payback the Nazis never imagined, one that turned persecution into precision and exile into strategy. Chapter 6. Occupied France. Where control was an illusion. To German planners, France looked quiet. Cafes reopened, trains ran, factories produced. From Berlin, occupation appeared efficient, even stable. But the calm was deceptive. Beneath everyday routines, an invisible infrastructure was growing, one that turned the very mechanisms of control into weapons. Farmers became scouts. Shopkeepers became informants. Housewives memorized patrol schedules while pretending to haggle over bread. The occupation functioned only because millions of civilians pretended it did. Every layer of German control created a dependency, and every dependency became a weakness. Railways that moved troops also carried saboteurs. Telephone lines meant for command were tapped, delayed, or subtly rerouted. Roadblocks, once terrifying, became predictable rituals. The more rigid the system grew, the easier it was to read. Fear forced German units into habits, and habits were fatal. Sabotage evolved from isolated acts of defiance into a coordinated strategy of disruption. The goal was rarely spectacular. A delayed train mattered more than a destroyed one. A bridge weakened, not collapsed, forced engineers to waste precious time. Confusion was currency. German commanders never knew whether a failure was mechanical incompetence or enemy action, and that uncertainty poisoned every decision. When the Allies landed, liberation did not begin. It was unleashed. Chapter 7. The Bicycle. Ride that broke the silence. In resistance warfare, silence could be deadlier than bullets. When radio contact failed, entire networks froze in place, unable to receive orders, request supplies, or warn of danger. Germany understood this well. Cutting communication was meant to suffocate rebellion slowly, forcing isolation and eventual collapse. For weeks, that strategy worked. Then Nancy Wake refused to accept it. With radio codes compromised and operators scattered, she faced a brutal truth. Without reconnection, the resistance would unravel. There were safer options: hiding, waiting, retreating. She rejected them all. Instead, she chose movement fast, visible, and audacious. A bicycle became her lifeline, and the roads of occupied France her battlefield. The journey was not heroic in the romantic sense. It was exhausting, filthy, and terrifying. She slept in barns, scavenged food, and pedaled through checkpoints where a single glance could have ended her life. German soldiers stood feet away from her, unaware they were watching one of the most wanted operatives in France ride past in plain sight. Each kilometer was a gamble against fate. Chapter 8. The Collapse and the Cost. By the final year of the war, Germany no longer dictated events and reacted to them. Grand strategies gave way to emergency measures. Retreat replaced conquest. Roads once used for advance became escape routes, and those routes were under constant attack. Bridges vanished, convoys burned. Communication fractured under pressure from resistance fighters who knew the land better than any map. The collapse was not orderly. It was violent, bitter, and deeply personal. German reprisals grew harsher as control slipped away. Villages paid the price for sabotage. Resistance fighters answered brutality with brutality of their own. The moral clarity of resistance blurred under the weight of survival. War demanded choices that peace would never forgive. Intelligence failures compounded the chaos. German commanders underestimated both the scale and coordination of resistance activity until it was too late. Entire units moved blind, unaware that civilians around them were guiding ambushes, timing attacks, and feeding information to Allied forces advancing from multiple fronts. When power creates its own nemesis, Germany expected obedience. It received retaliation. It expected silence. It triggered a rebellion that grew stronger the harder it tried to suppress it. Across Europe, power revealed its greatest weakness. It depended on fear to function, and fear, once understood, could be resisted, manipulated, and ultimately overcome. From frozen fortresses on the Eastern Front to mountain hideouts in occupied France, from interrogation rooms thick with deception to dirt roads traced by bicycle tires, the payback Germany never expected took many forms, some loud, some invisible, all relentless. History is not only shaped by what happened, but by what those in power failed to anticipate. And that is why these stories matter. If this story challenged how you see history, subscribe, like, and share. Because the most dangerous mistakes are not the ones remembered, but the ones repeated.